Before we look at the configuration, let's talk about application contexts for a second. Application contexts define several parameters of a NEOS application. NEOS comes with 3 predefined contexts that cannot be changed. The first one is the development context. If I simply execute the flow CLI command, it will show me the context that it's running in. And we can see here that the development context is active by default. To change the active context, we can set the flow_context environment variable. Let's set it to production here and see what happens. And now we can see NEOS is running in the production context. The production context is optimized for speed, so there's aggressive caching and no file watching, while the development context, which we by default use to develop applications, has a file watcher, so caches are automatically deleted whenever anything changes. And lastly, there's the testing context, which is mainly used to run automatic tests. You cannot define your own contexts, so if you try to run NEOS in a context that doesn't exist, for example foo, it will give you an error message. Let's take a look at how configuration works. It is best practice to define configuration in your packages. So I'll just open the package which I have already prepared here, and you should namespace the config to your package name. So I'll set the first 2 keys as my package and then set a key of foo and set it to a string of bar. And now I can execute flow configuration :show -- type settings -- path my.package.foo, and we can see here that it's now a value of bar. Sometimes we can override, or we have to override, configuration globally. I already prepared a global configuration file which is directly in the configuration directory. Let's override that my package key of foo and set it to global. Let's run that again. And we can see now that the value of this key is global. Now, configuration is context dependent. So if I create a context-specific configuration file for this package in a subfolder of development in my configuration folder, settings.yaml, and set my package foo to context-specific, run it again, and we can see now it displays a string of context-specific. If I were to execute this now for the production context, we would see a different picture. You can see for the production context the value is still global, and the reason for that is because there is no context-specific configuration for the production context, so it's picking up the regular global one. Of course, context-specific global configuration will again override the non-context-specific one. So in that development context settings.yaml file which already exists, I'm going to set it to global context. Execute again, and we can see now the value is global context. So the hierarchy is first global context-specific configuration, then local context-specific configuration, then global non-context-specific config, and lastly, the local non-context-specific config. I said before that you cannot define your own application contexts, and while that is true, it is possible to define your own subcontext. So what we can do actually is create a subcontext in that development folder, let's call it foo, and create a settings.yaml file for it, and set that value of my package foo to subcontext. Now, if I run this in just the regular development context, it should display the string global context. However, if I manually set the application context to development/foo, we will see that string of subcontext here. And there it is. So that is how context hierarchy works in NEOS.